Lieutenant Michael Yoder, who's been with the Centerville Police Department for 21 years. It's I believe you command the Support Services Division, and is very involved with some of the department's fundraising and philanthropic activities through CPD Cares, and he has recently become a drone operator. And we have Lieutenant Anthony Green, who commands the Community Relations and Bike Patrol Divisions. Been with the department since 2009 and is also a drone operator. So I guess if you're into a life of crime in Centerville, you can run, but you can't hide with all these drones around. So with that.
Today, our topic mainly is going to be just health and safety in the workplace. We wanted to do kind of the police perspective of health and safety in the workplace. So there are specific things that we may do that you guys don't do in your specific fields, but a lot of the things that we are going to talk about or that we do, particularly for ourselves in policing, some of that can transition over to what you guys are doing. So hopefully just the mere discussion that we're going to have today and the talk that we're going to talk about can be brought back to your organizations and maybe have some discussions about, okay, how can we do some of this stuff that the police department does? So we'll get into all that. So to kick things off, my name is Mike Yoder. I am the Support Service Lieutenant here at the Centerville Police Department. I started my career in 2002 with the Centerville Police Department, and this is the only agency that I've worked for, so I've been blessed to get hired in here right from the get-go and have a good 21-year career so far. Looking forward to finishing my career here. The trajectory that I've kind of taken during my career is I started as a patrol officer and did that for a few years. And then I got a unique opportunity where we had an opening in the canine division. So I love dogs, so I'm like, hey, this sounds like it might be a fun job. So I was able to get that position, the stars aligned for me, and I was able to do that for the next 6 years of my career and had a wonderful time. Had a dual purpose canine. His name was Boris. And he was a Belgian Malinois, so he was trained both to detect narcotics, which we use probably primarily for that, but he was also trained dual purpose, so the other aspect of it is patrol work. So he did the location, the tracking, the building searches, the biting if you had to. It was whatever we needed to do. So I mean, he was there for us, did a great job for those 6 years. Then I got promoted to sergeant. So once we got the promotion, I tried to do everything I could to keep working the dog as a sergeant, and looking back now, the lieutenants were like, no, it's too much of a responsibility to do both. And I got to admit they were probably right now that I've kind of moved up to the next level. So I did sergeant for a few years, did patrol sergeant, came over to staff service sergeant, and then got promoted back in 2018 to lieutenant. So I've been in a couple different roles in the lieutenant. Right now, the support service section, I oversee our communications division and our accreditation, so for the department. So we are an accredited agency, and what we do that is through CALEA, which is accreditation. It's the Commission for Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. So it's basically a standard. So what CALEA does is make sure that our agency has the current up-to-date policies and procedures in place so that we can show anybody that may have questions that we're doing what the standard is in our profession. So that's a way to keep us accountable. A lot of agencies are starting to go in that direction. So we take advantage of that anytime we can. So last thing that I'm kind of focused on right now is just leadership development through the city. We've taken our strategic plan and we're trying to really implement and develop a culture where we're high performing across the board, from the front line to our supervisors. It really comes down to everybody is a leader, everybody's a manager, and everybody does task work. So it's just a matter of how you split up your time doing those three tasks. But we got to get away from the way we used to think, where, okay, the boss makes all the decisions and then everybody just does what we tell you to. That doesn't work anymore, and we want to make sure that everybody here has a voice. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
All right, as I said, my name is Anthony Green. I'm our Community Relations Lieutenant. I started here at Centerville in 2009 as a patrol officer. Like Mike, this was my first job. I came here about 10 months after college, and so this is the only department that I know. I was promoted to sergeant in 2018 and really loved that role. I worked in the road patrol. I worked, my last stint was with 2 shifts a day shift, 2 shifts of evening shift, and just really enjoyed everything that road patrol had to offer, the stories, and I don't get that so much anymore, but just excited for this new opportunity. I got promoted a month ago today, so I'm still drinking from a fire hose. Appreciate that. So I'm the community relations, as Lieutenant Yoder said, he's support services. In my time on the road, I was a field training officer. I really loved that position. I loved training new officers. It was just something that made me feel strong. It was something I really enjoyed. And then I was also a bike officer. And most recently, about the last year and a half, I've supervised our drone program. So that was something that I started just as a hobbyist. I like to do video editing, and I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old at home, and just making videos of them and some of the things that we were doing, and it turned into wanting to get aerial shots of things. So bought a drone on Amazon and put it in my in-laws' soybean field on my first, its maiden voyage, and so I had nowhere to go but up. No pun intended. And so since then, our chief and really the whole city administration has been on board with our drone program, and it's been exciting to see that grow from its infancy and being a big part of that. So we're going to speak some more about that and just how that relates to safety at our department. But that's me in a nutshell.
All right, so we've kind of identified 4 or 5 different things that we want to talk about today, and with each one, take advantage of this opportunity. You got two veteran officers here, and we're happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. So the first thing that we wanted to touch on today was with health and safety is our creation of our emergency operations plan. Those are good to have in place, and it's not a cover-all. It doesn't say, okay, when this particular incident happens, this is what you have to do, but it does create some guidelines for you to follow. And it gives us the opportunity to be consistent with other agencies around us. Because you got to remember, as police department, we're going to have a pretty major response to events, and we're responsible for businesses, citizens, everybody that's in our community. We got to make sure that security is safe, the perimeter, any supplies or logistics that we have are there. So one of the quotes that I like is from Ben Franklin: "By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail." So the EOP is us preparing for these disasters or these emergency events that may occur or they may not occur. You know, Centerville is a great community, and we're fortunate enough that we don't have a lot of the serious events, serious crimes, things that you might see in these bigger cities. But it doesn't negate the fact that they still happen here and they can happen here. So we've got to do our due diligence to put us in a position where our officers can respond appropriately, be safe, and provide that high level of service to the community members and the businesses that we may be interacting with during that time. So if we don't have an EOP, we are failing to prepare. Combined plan for Centerville, Washington Township. So this EOP that we're talking about, Emergency Operation Plan, is a joint plan for both us and Washington Township. When you think Centerville or Washington Township, you think they're one and the same. You know, Dayton Mall is in Centerville, right? Even though it's Miami Township. It's just all this area is kind of Centerville when people think about it. So we share a lot of things, us and the Washington Township. We share libraries, parks. We've got community events that we do together. Just everything is kind of intertwined. The fire department. So it made sense for us to kind of create this EOP together with them in conjunction. So we just actually revised ours this last year. And when we have an emergency event, whatever it might be, if it's a tornado that comes through, which we just recently had in Dayton, if we were to have one through us, we've got 2 designated locations where we would have an emergency operations center. So one is designated here in Centerville, it's a primary location. And then the other one is going to be in Washington Township. So there's a backup. And they're both at least a mile away from each other, so that we're not necessarily getting wiped out by a tornado in both locations, just in case something bad happens. So we've got our response that we've kind of created. We know how we're going to do that. The other thing we do is we follow the NIMS ICS training. So have any of you guys taken that? Do you guys know what NIMS is? So that's the National Incident Management System. And then ICS is, anybody take that? That's the Incident Command System. So basically, this is the federal government has created basically a training and response plan so that when we have these critical incidents, there is a structure and there's a hierarchy that we follow. And that creates order for us when we do it. The police department, we don't use that very often, but every call the fire department goes on, they activate this ICS system. So they are well versed in everything that we need to do with it. They would probably run point if we did a joint call out or something that we have to go to together, just because they're a lot more versed with it. But we have received the training and we are able to do that as well to create that consistency. And then finally, the thing is just organized response to natural, technological, and civil events. So anytime anything bad can happen. Do you want to kind of talk about the structure a little bit?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. The nice thing that I've learned with this, so I've done all the ICS and the NIMS training, and it's long. It's sometimes hard to follow. You're in with a lot of various positions within the city. I mean, you have city managers, various city staff, fire department. So being able to kind of run through some things with them, it just gives a different perspective than what we would have as police. And so we use the same system for our Americana Festival, which we have upwards of 75,000 people through all of our events. I mean, it's a big undertaking, especially for a small to medium-sized department. I mean, we have a lot to do with that. So this helps provide a lot of structure. And then recently we had our National Night Out, and so that fell under my umbrella, and I was able to utilize this. And it's just, you go through all the training, but you don't realize what it's like until you start putting names into these positions and you kind of see the structure. And if we would have an incident, unfortunately, but fortunately we would have this system in place that we could say, hey, this person's doing this. And I think when we were doing this training, I remember I played a lot of baseball growing up, and my dad would always say that how much a bunt creates chaos. And that was kind of my analogy for this. When you're practicing fielding bunts and the defensive side, like, you want to be able to prepare for that chaos. And so I think that this system is what helps us get ready for something. I mean, should we have something at Americana when you're dealing with thousands and thousands of people trying to keep them safe? We have a system in place that should something happen, we're going to try to keep every person safe, ourselves safe, and try to prevent a kind of a secondary incident. So that's what's nice about this. It's nice to see it in action when you put real names behind those positions.
So these are kind of the events that they've kind of identified. There's high hazard, medium hazard, and low hazard events. The high hazard events, this is going to be like fire, snow, ice, tornado, explosion, hostage bombing. There's a high likelihood of disaster with these where property can be destroyed and also human life is at stake. So those are kind of the high hazard events, but these are events. So for instance, we'll say a snowstorm comes through. If we have 3 feet of snow dumped in our community, that's going to create a lot of logistical problems that we have to sit down. So we'll probably activate our emergency operations center and bring in the people that need to come in, because we have to make a lot of decisions at that point in time. We get 3 feet of snow. What are some of the problems that people might have? Just thinking about it logistically. Stuck in their homes.
Are you asking out
Yep.
loud? They could slip, fall, especially if they're fall risk, like geriatric patients.
Yep.
And half the time, if they live alone, I mean, there's cases where they will be found. And if it's super cold, they could die.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then if people don't have food,
Very good.
they'll be in their house with no food.
Yep. Very good.
I mean, I'm sure the list goes on.
Oh yeah. Anybody else got any real quick? One or two? Power outages. Yeah. Very good one.
You know what I'm thinking of is Maui right now.
Maui. Perfect example. The firestorm. Yep. Came out of nowhere. The high winds came through, and before you know it, half the island is under fire. And
Their business was located in a situation like that. You know, it's a trickle down, really.
So now we got the logistical question. So we've got our EOC activated. And we'll use that example because it's more recent in history. So we get that wildfires in Maui, if you guys are familiar with that. So a lot of people forced out of their homes immediately. They're driving through the flames. They're jumping into the ocean. They're doing anything they can to get away from these flames until somebody can rescue them. So the first part of our being police department, the first part of that operation for us would be rescue, safety. We need to get people out of there, and then anybody that we can rescue, we can rescue. So that would be the first and priority thing. Then we would probably set up a perimeter. We'd figure out which direction that fire is going, and we need to keep everybody out. You know, you got no reason to be in this area, so that would probably be more of a police function. The rescuing part, that would probably involve helicopters, Coast Guard, fire departments, so that would be kind of left to them, a lot of that, because they have the gear to get into the fires and to fight the fires and things like that. So they would then be brought in. Now you've got the logistical parts where you've got to talk about, okay, how are we going to get the resources that we need to provide the water, to provide the fuel, to provide shelter, food, you know, whatever it is that we need to do, because then you got the residents and you've got the tourists. So you can see that these questions just start piling up with a natural disaster or a big emergency. And that's more reason why you need this emergency operation plan system in place, because now you're going to have the governor probably in these meetings because he's got to declare a state of emergency to get federal funding to get the resources from everywhere else that they might need. So there's a lot of components. You need your financial department, you need your city managers, your governors, your mayors, your township trustees. All of those are the decision makers in the process, so they need to be involved with these. Now we take it another step where we've actually created the book, this big book for emergency operations plan, but we also do annual trainings. So we'll set up scenarios and we will bring all of those playmakers from the city and the township into these meetings and do like a mock disaster or a mock scenario so that they can see, okay, well, we just had this tornado, so what do you do? Oh, we need to authorize the state to give us funds, or we need to bring in equipment, you know, front end loaders. Where are we going to find that? Where are we going to go? It gets them thinking. It gets them wondering, like, okay, well, what might we need? What do we need if this happens? But by failing to prepare, we're preparing to fail. So we take that serious. So if we can put them in a situation where they actually got to think for a while, we're going to do that. And I would recommend that for everybody here, whatever your businesses are, whatever groups that you guys oversee. If there's something bad that might happen, get together and at least have those discussions. You know, how are we going to resolve this if it happens? And we take the snowstorm, you know, if you're associated with a hospital or Bethany, okay, now everybody's snowed in. You can't get in, you can't get out. You know, do you have enough supplies to take care of everyone for a certain amount of time? How are you going to get new supplies in? Just things like that you need to think about. So the next thing with health and safety that we wanted to talk about is personal protective equipment, PPE. I'm sure everybody does at some level. So PPE is just basically anything that we use to protect ourselves, minimize exposure to any sort of infectious disease. Being police officers, we have the likelihood to be exposed to certain things that maybe not everybody is, because we're going into situations and calls that we don't know what it is. Sometimes we're going into homes, we're going into hospitals, we're responding to maybe a crash scene, and a lot of those have the potential of exposing us to things. Here's a few examples of it.
Yeah, so another thing to touch on with our department is we're all trained as emergency medical responders. So we all take a week-long course. It's a step below the first level of paramedic. So going on all these medic calls, I'm sure you can fill in the gaps. We see a lot of different things, a lot of different situations. We're exposed to a lot of things associated with the human body. So we want to make sure that we're protected. And another thing too, with the narcotics and the needles and the drug stuff, I mean, I'm sure you've heard that officers will overdose on fentanyl just by handling it or coming in contact with it. So we actually keep Narcan. Not only do we have it for ourselves, but we keep it in our evidence area in case we would come in contact with it and we would have an officer overdose at the PD. So it's kind of an ever-evolving thing just to make sure that we're keeping ourselves safe. And the other thing too is just it happens where we do perform CPR on people and just want to make sure that we're safe. Obviously, COVID-19 threw a big wrench into a lot of things, and just realizing what we are and aren't prepared for. And So I think that's helped post-COVID realize what we need to be ready for. But yeah, I mean, we've had several officers, even in the last couple months, perform CPR. We had one save a baby not long ago, and just being prepared for that and using the right equipment, really not only helps us, but it certainly helps the community in being able to save a life if need be.
To elaborate a little bit more on what he was saying too, so we do have like those certain threats of like the narcotics. So we've got the needle, we might get stuck with a needle. So we want to make sure that we're using caution, searching cars, searching people. That's training that we all receive to do those things. The Narcan is a big thing. So with the opioid epidemic that we've been experiencing over the last decade or so, we've seen a lot of that, even in our community, where we've dealt with that, and it's a real thing, and people don't even realize a lot of times when they're buying heroin or they're getting whatever drugs that they're getting off the street, it's going to be laced with other things, and they don't know what's in those. And eventually fentanyl started getting laced into that, and that's where we started seeing videos and getting additional training that, hey, when you're searching cars and you touch your nose or you do something and you may have touched the fentanyl, you'll see these videos of these officers just kind of like losing their balance and maybe falling over, and it could be scary, and we take that seriously. So I mean, like he said, every officer is issued Narcan, so generally if you're searching things, we got a second officer there so we can get immediate assistance with that. In our processing area, we've got cameras that are always monitored, so our dispatchers see the officers when they're back there submitting evidence. So if something were to happen back there, they would see somebody go down, and we can respond to that as well. But those are like really, really big threats for us in our profession, where we actually think about that stuff. Like, okay, what am I going to do if this happens to me or if this happens to my partner? Because then you're in a situation where you got to react right away. And one good thing about police officers is we play life scenarios in our head 24/7. We could be walking through Walmart and we're like, okay, if the bad guy comes in and he does this, what am I going to do? And what's going to happen if this happens? So they're almost always prepared for some sort of situation, which is a good thing for police officers, is that preparation. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the bed bugs. So going into people's homes, like I just get the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it, but like some people just aren't clean, and they don't take care of their homes, and they don't have the best sanitary conditions, I guess is what we could call it. So we had an incident. Were you involved in that?
I was not.
Okay. We had an incident a couple years ago where we had 3 or 4 officers in. I think it was a medic call is what it was, and they were dealing with the residents, doing the thing that we have to do. We're helping out in the house. And then afterwards, they come out and they realize this house is infested with bed bugs. And so now they've got their uniforms, and we're like, okay, now what do we do? We got 3 or 4 officers that were just exposed to all these bed bugs walking around the house. We don't want them to get in the cruiser and drive back, so it's like, what are we going to do? So I think we ended up getting our public works department to come out with a truck. They all had to jump in the back of the truck. Then they had to come back here and like delouse and like clean everything. And I think we threw all the uniforms in like the dryer and turned it up to high, and just those steps that we have to take, when you go home. And some of the other cities that may work like where there's more infestation of bed bugs, like they have a habit of like when they get home at night, they'll change in like the garage. Like they don't want to introduce anything into their own homes. But those are things that they have to think about. And, it's like, this is part of the job. Yes, this is what we do. But we are exposed to different situations, and we got to mitigate those whenever we can. A few types of PPE that we use every day: gloves, masks, Tyvek suits. So our officers are actually issued the white Tyvek suits. We're also all trained with gas masks. So if there's any sort of agents, even pepper spray or something, if there's a situation where somebody's using that, we can don everything that we have and not be exposed to that, so we can still do our job while wearing the gas masks. CPR bag mask, keep those in the cars and the cruisers. Like you said, we've had to do CPR quite a few times, all trained with the AEDs as well. Also with our training, like ears and eyes. So when we're shooting at the range, you got to make sure we keep our ears covered. You don't want to blow out any eardrums when you're shooting the guns a lot. And then our bulletproof vests. So when we're on the roads, we got to make sure we're protected just in case.
So one of the big things that's really come to light the last couple of years has been employee wellness and making sure we're taking care of each other. As Mike mentioned earlier, we don't have a lot in Centerville in terms of traumatic events for officers, but we do have some. I mean, I want to say it was 2017, we had an officer-involved shooting right here on Virginia Avenue, and that one of those officers is still with us, one retired, but I just remember I was away at training and that happened, and just obviously thinking about your friend at that moment, right? And they were both uninjured. They were not fired upon, but they both had to fire their weapon, and it takes a toll. I had a friend at Lebanon PD that I went to training with, and he was recently involved in a shooting in June. So it's just one of those things, send them some text messages, hey, hope you're doing okay, and if you need something, let me know. There's just, I know a lot of times with police, we get the tough guy persona, right? And we always talk about like the SWAT guys that look like the WWF wrestlers and all that stuff, but we have families. We go home and we carry things with us, and a lot of times it's easy to put up the facade that everything's okay, but unfortunately, the number one cause for officer deaths is suicide, and it doesn't get talked about a lot. And I serve on our county memorial committee, and so our focus is the officers that have been killed in the line of duty, and I go to DC most years, and that's one of the things that gets touched on is they have a moment of silence for the officers that have taken their own life. And I want to say every year it's generally around 300 or so, and which outside of the COVID years far exceeded the number of officers killed in the line of duty. So it's one of those things that we just want to make sure we're offering those trainings, and crisis intervention training has become a big thing. We've been sending a lot of officers. We have a crisis management team that will reach out, do debriefings for certain incidents. I know when we had the Oregon District shooting, there was officers from our agency that were on that team that responded to help with the officers. You just never know what you're going to experience in some of these, and obviously I mentioned earlier, I have kids at home, and we've been on some tough calls with kids, and it's not easy, and you wouldn't think it's going to affect you until it does, and sometimes it's too late. So just taking care of each other. And on the screen there, we recently had a homicide investigation down on Sheehan Road. Middle of the night, someone was trying to force entry into a home, and there was a shot fired and a fatality there. So the officers responding to that scene, they're dealing with that, and it's our night shift, so we have a lot of young officers, most of which have probably not been exposed to anything like that in their life. So just making sure that those guys are okay and coming back, hey, what did you think of this? Do you need to talk about this? Let's move forward this together. You're not by yourself. And we unfortunately had a fatal pedestrian strike with a 9-year-old this summer. I'm sure you heard about that down here on South Main Street. And same thing, you're the first officers there. I think the first officer there was actually an officer in training. He'd been with Dayton Police Department for about a decade, but had that been a new officer, I think making sure that he's okay and that he's not going to hang it up after that. I know when I was in training, we had a near fatal pedestrian strike at Main and Franklin, and it was kind of at that moment, I'm like, I'm not in the police academy anymore. I'm watching this lady bleed profusely, and I'll never forget that. Not something that necessarily bothered me today, but just seeing that and exposing yourself to that, we just wanted to make sure we're taking care of each other. So I've mentioned we have some of these trainings and things that are being put in place, and I'm glad the state's doing what they're doing to help us and make sure we're okay. And there's different things being offered now. I go to a Responders in Faith conference every March, or the last 2 Marches, and it's one of those things that really helps. Just hearing other people's stories, and you never know what somebody's going through, and it's not just in the police world, it's in the everyday. So just making sure we're taking care of each other and trying to take care of our mental health. I know there's a big stigma around that, right? That getting some help might make you look weak, but some officers have taken some big steps, and I think that that's awesome, and I hope that continues. So just making sure we're taking care of each other.
Yeah, we can't emphasize enough the mental health aspect of it. So officers, and emergency responders in general, they can get exposed to a lot of different things. And just because you're involved in a shooting or you respond to a fatality of some sort, once the call's done doesn't mean the call's done. If anything, that's when everything starts beginning for you as a human, because now you've got to process what you just did. Your training kicked in, you did what you had to do, you probably got through it. But now your nerves might kick up and you might start, having nightmares, or you might start thinking things. And like Anthony said, in the old days, it was like, suck it up, buttercup, this is your job, go do it. If you can't do it, then find something else. And that's just not the right mentality to have. We're all human. We're all going to experience these sorts of emotions. So we're trying to do a better job providing any sort of service that we can after the fact. So when we know people are exposed to something that may be trivial or may be, serious, people are going to respond differently. Somebody might say, oh, no, not a big deal. I've seen this a million times. But that one person, they're going to dwell on it and they're going to think about it and it's going to consume them and they might lose sleep. And those are the people that we're concerned about, people that, might change their lives about it. And we need to be proactive in our agency, in our cities, in our jobs about, what can we do for this person? A couple things that we have up here. The first thing that we always do in a major incident is a debrief. So we're going to get everybody, so we'll say the child that got struck and killed over recently in our city. Anybody that responded to that call, we did a debrief with them and basically said, okay, let's talk about what happened and what we did, what you experienced, what could we do better. And it gives them the opportunity to talk with people that went through that same incident with them. So it's voluntary. We don't need to force anybody to do that, but we do bring those opportunities in. The EAP, I think everybody's got some sort of EAP associated with their business, Employee Assistance Program. So this is 100% confidential. So if you're experiencing anything, you call a number, they assign you a date and somebody to talk to, and they take care of it. We don't know anything about who's going, what's going on with it, but it gives them an opportunity where you don't have to go through your insurance. It's provided by the city, and it can help you with anything. And that EAP is for anything. If you're having marital problems, if you're having, problems with your kids, if you have a problem with an employee or whatever, one of your coworkers, you can call the EAP and talk it through with somebody and try to get some assistance. Support through CISM, that's the Crisis Intervention Stress Management. Then we also got the CIT training. It's a crisis intervention team. So we've got certain people, like he mentioned with Oregon, where they've actually received advanced training on how to deal with first responders that have gone through something big, major, and they need to talk. So the exposure to our region with that Oregon shooting, there were first responders, police, fire, emergency medical person, and then citizens too. They saw a lot and they jumped in and they helped out, but it was a very bad scene. So we had actually the CIT, Crisis Intervention Team, meeting regularly. They actually kept, I think, the convention center open for a week or two where people could come in and talk and get some assistance and get some help if they needed it. Again, we're not forcing anybody to do it, but we got to provide those opportunities for them. Some agencies, not us, but some agencies actually have taken it a step further, and they actually require each of their employees to go talk to a counselor for 1 hour. They said, we don't care if you just sit in there for an hour, we don't care if you talk about something, but you're going to go see this counselor and talk for an hour. So that's another thing that can be done. And then, like Anthony said, Lieutenant Green said, suicide is a real deal. We've had one in our region in the last few years, one of our local agencies. So those things happen and people struggle. And when it gets to that point where somebody's actually taking their life, it's going to affect them, their immediate family, and then their work family too. Everybody whose lives they touch is going to affect. So we want to do everything we can to help them when we get those opportunities.
Yeah, so one of the big things that with a lot of the safety stuff, I mean, it boils down to training, right? And I feel like our agency, we really have a kind of a youth movement with us. I mean, we're hoping to hire 8 in the next year. So we're going to have a lot of young officers, and just making sure they understand what's around them, having some self-awareness. I mean, I don't really have to say much about, we have the the millennials coming on, and I know there's some comedy stuff with the millennials and the police, but we just got to make sure that we're building the right habits and making sure we're staying safe, because we do have those incidents where some people's lives can be put in jeopardy if we don't do the right thing, or we don't act, or another officer can get hurt if we're not jumping in and making sure we're utilizing our training. So that's been the big push, is just really making you realize this is something that's going to hurt you, or this is something you did well. I mean, we try to review camera footage as much as we can, especially with the new officers, just making sure, hey, this is a scenario where this was a threat. I don't know if you saw it, but yeah.
Are you seeing an increase or a decrease in people wanting to be in your field at this point?
Major decrease. It's recruitment is really tough right now, nationwide.
Yeah, because I keep speaking for you, assuming when you got in the field, you probably didn't think it was going to be exactly how it is today.
Oh, no, it's constantly changing, yeah. When we applied, I mean, there were hundreds of applicants, and you were fighting for a position. Now, there's less applicants, so not as hard, but obviously you got to get through all the steps, and you have your standards of people that you're going to hire. So, as Lieutenant Green mentioned, the habits that we form in our training, that's the things that are going to reduce liability for our agency. If you think of the matrix, high risk, low frequency, those are the ones that we worry most about, but those are the ones that you need to train for. So if something that doesn't happen very often, but it's probably got the highest risk of liability that we're going to do, and that would be like an officer-involved shooting or something like that. So what training have we provided that officer? Have they qualified? We qualify multiple times throughout the year, but have they done the qualifications? Are they proficient? Do they know how to work their weapons, draw their weapons? Do they know what our force continuum is? Do they know where they need to go if somebody doesn't comply with this thing and with the next thing? So there are certain things that we got to do and we've got to follow. And in order for us to be confident in all the employees, they got to receive that training. So, and this is just one aspect. Obviously, there's a lot of different trainings that they receive, but particularly with use of force, that's one of those low frequency, high risk things that we worry about, because we do not have to go hands on and we do not have to fight people very often. So we worry about that. Proper handcuffing techniques, again, anytime that we can minimize injuries both to the officers and to maybe suspects that we're detaining, they got to know how to handcuff them, how to double lock them, and make sure that they're secure. Same with the taser. When we have to use the taser, we have to deploy a taser. There's a lot of training that people probably don't realize that go into that as well. We want to make sure that the taser is deployed in the proper process, and then while it's being deployed, we want to minimize the risk and the repeated tasing. So there's certain steps that we got to take after that happens to get the suspect under control so that we can just stop the situation at that point in time. And then CIT, again, we talked a little bit about that. I'm going to kind of push through a little bit faster because I do want to get to the drones. Lieutenant Green, that's always a fun thing to talk about. We want to get into that. So personal health, that's a big thing for us, staying fit for duty. Each officer is accountable for their own physical fitness. We do not have mandatory standards. Once you get hired here, you do to go through the academy and to get into the field. Once you kind of get into the job, it's kind of your own personal responsibility to make sure you're taking care of yourself. This is one of the posters that they always blast with new officers especially. Basically, it's got people in the prison yard. They're working out every day. What are you doing? Because eventually they're going to get released, and are you going to be able to take care of yourself and your partner? So what are you doing every day? A city's kind of committed to our health as well. They give us discounted gym memberships, state-of-the-art gym at the police department. We got a wonderful gym. So we lost an officer back in 1998, John Calaman, if you guys were in the area when that happened. Unfortunate death on the highway. But part of it, his parents, they actually built our fitness center upstairs, and we've got state-of-the-art Nautilus, free weights. We got everything in there, and they wanted to make sure that we kind of remembered John Calaman and were able to take care of ourselves moving forward. So it was a very nice gesture on their part. There's some incentives that they offer, and then also the Healthy Heroes program, which is a partnership with Premier Health, where they basically come here weekly, and if we have any bumps and bruises or things that they can help us with, they help get us there or get us referrals to where we need to go.
I'll wrap this up just with some of our drone stuff that we've been doing. And You know, the first thing that people think, oh, the police have drones, they're just going to spy on us. And, you know, the thing I like to say is it's not about surveillance, it's about safety. And no, we're not trying to spy on you at your backyard cookout. You know, we're just trying to keep people safe. And we've been able to utilize this for numerous different things. And, I mean, not only is it fun, but it truly is. It's something that we're not putting officers at risk. I mean, we can replace a drone easily. We can't replace a human being. I'm sure you've heard that before. So I'll pass this around. This is our the one drone that we have at the department. We're going to be getting some more, but this is a DJI Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced. So one of the big things that we like about this drone is it's got some features to it, and one of them is a speaker. So I can have the drone, I can put it up, and if we were to have an incident where we have a barricaded subject, there's a hostage situation, I can fly this drone up and I can speak with this person. Now, right now this one doesn't have two-way communication, but I can keep giving them commands until we can visibly see that he's complying. So that's one of the things that we like. We don't have to send an officer up to a door. We can send this piece of equipment up and it's going to work. What did they cost? That one, I think, was about $7,000. Yeah. Now, the thing that makes it more expensive is it has infrared. So you can see the car underwater. We had an incident where a stolen car to Waynesville, the suspect drove the car up to the Home to Suites up on Wilmington Pike. We got sent up there because the dealership was tracking the car. So our officer gets up there and the windows are tinted. The officer can't see in. So he pulls up behind the vehicle, and the driver was in it. And so he starts it up and starts taking off. Well, our officer was able to kind of follow it back into the Cornerstone development. And this is springtime. We had a lot of rain. The suspect's trying to get away, and he drives it into one of the ponds up at Cornerstone. So it really was only about 2 feet of water, but you just don't know. And I was able to take the drone using the infrared, fly it around the car up to the window and clear that car so that I know that there's nobody in there, officer's not going to get hurt, the tow truck driver's not going to get hurt. So it's just one of the unique ways that we're able to use this. We've been able to use it at Americana, and I could get a live stream into our emergency operations center. So going back kind of to close the loop with that, if we would have an incident, I can put the drone up, keep myself safe, and we can have eyes on whatever's going on out there. So again, not surveillance, it's just about safety.
One of the things I want to add too with Americana, which was pretty neat. This is, like I said, this is a new program, and Lieutenant Green's done a phenomenal job bringing it up to where we're at right now. Sky's the limit for the program, but we did deploy it for Americana this year, and as you can imagine, that was a pretty big event, a lot of people. But one thing we did that we hadn't done in the past is we got it out for the fireworks at the high school that night. And as the fireworks ended, we had the drone up in the air, and we were using it to monitor traffic flow in and out of the high school so we could see where log jams were. There was an accident at one point on Franklin Street, and we flew there in less than a minute. And we were able to see how, what it was doing. We could deploy our units to it. So there's a lot of other things that we can do with that drone that help us in our roles as police officers. And like I said, it's just the tip of the iceberg with what we're doing right now, but there's a lot more that we can do and respond and keep our officers safe and help the community at the same time. So.
Yeah, and one of the other features is a spotlight. I won't put it on in here, but I've about blinded myself with that trying in the building. Just another thing at night, if we would need to get light on something that's high, we can do that. The last thing is a beacon. Now, part of this is just with the FAA, we have to be able to keep line of sight with it, and it has to have a light that's visible, I believe, within 3 miles. So I had this beacon on when we were doing the fireworks. Obviously, it's 10:30 at night, it's dark, so I'm using the thermal, and I could put this up. And the ironic thing, it rained that night. It was getting kind of foggy, and with the haze from all the fireworks smoke, it wasn't leaving the area. There wasn't much wind. So with this beacon up, I could see it with no problem. So just one of the things that we're able to keep our officers safe and help the community. I mean, that crash was just kind of interesting. I mean, you obviously don't wish a crash would happen, and this was very minor, but it got us to see all the things that we can do with this. And like I said, with being able to keep officers safe is the big thing. And there's kind of a push too for drones that we can fly inside. Smaller micro drones. I know a lot of SWAT teams use them, but that's kind of where the technology is heading, is we can fly these inside, and you can put a drone in a room where a person's barricaded and see exactly where they are, what they're doing, and you don't have to have a human being do that. They don't have to take a round. I mean, this thing can be replaced pretty easily, and there's one that's coming out now. You know, their video for it, their promo video, it shows the suspect knocking it down, I think throws it out the window, and then the drone gets back up and goes back through. So, you know, the big thing is we're not putting officers in harm. We're able to keep ourselves safe. I know that's, you know, the big premise of this talk is being able to keep ourselves safe. And with this technology, that's where it's heading. We're able to use a machine instead of a human being, and the lower that we can get that line of duty death number in Washington, D.C. every year. I mean, just hearing all those names at the Candlelight Vigil get read off, I mean, it just, every time the bell tolls, it weighs on you and weighs on you. So the less bells that toll, the better. And I'm happy with what we've done with this, and I think this technology, like I said, we're not trying to watch you, we're trying to keep ourselves and you safe. So.
All right, 9:31 now, so.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.